Good evening. We have made it to part 4 of our story. I hope everybody is having a wonderful spring so far. We've been out in the yard and enjoying the wonderful weather that we've had. So we're on part 4, and this will be stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Lot. The first story is called God Finds a Boy. About 100 years after the flood, God scattered the people who were building the Tower of Babel. We just read that story. We know this because a baby who happened to be born just then was given the name of Peleg, meaning division, because in his time the earth was divided. It is easy to count back to Arphaxad, the boy born to Shem 2 years after the flood, and find the date. As the people moved away from Babel, some did not go very far. One group, led by Nimrod, Noah's great-grandson, traveled north about 250 miles and built the city of Nineveh. Another group went south and built a town called Ur. Still others wandered westward into Europe, and many traveled east into India, China, Siberia, and perhaps across the Bering Strait into North America. Soon, villages, towns, and cities sprang up all over the place. Hold on. Resume. Soon, villages, towns, and cities sprang up all over the place. Industries were started because people needed tools for building, farming, and cooking. Somebody discovered iron ore and started making iron tools. Somebody else found copper ore and learned how to smelt it. Others found gold, silver, and precious stones buried by the flood. Can I pause for a second and just say, I feel like all these people are inventing and finding things because they are bored enough to think of ways to help their lives. We are not bored enough in our life to go out and invent things. Resume. Soon, goldsmiths and silversmiths were making beautiful ornaments. You can see some of these in museums today. Boat builders began making small craft to sail on the Euphrates, then larger and larger vessels to sail out into the unknown seas beyond the Persian Gulf. Sadly, as the people became busier and busier, they began to forget about God, drifting away from him just like their fathers before the flood. It seems like we get into this pattern. Patterns repeat themselves if you do not break the cycle. So we do not want to drift away from God, no matter our level in life. Some even made idols and worshiped them. Pause again. If you're going to make the time to make an idol and worship a fake idol, why not worship the actual true God that you know is there? Like, you're taking the time to worship an idol. Why not worship God? That's what I don't get. Sorry, resume. This is hard to understand because Noah and his sons were still alive. Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and Shem 502 years. The influence of these men who knew what God had done in the past should have kept the others true and faithful, but it didn't. These older men kept on telling their children how God had destroyed the world because of sin and how he had saved them in the ark. Like, those people wouldn't even be there if it weren't for their bloodline, Noah, being faithful to God and being saved in the ark. These older men kept on telling their children how God had destroyed the world because of sin and how he had saved them in the ark, but it became just an old story, and after a while nobody wanted to listen. As the years passed, wickedness increased, for when people forgot God, they began to sin. 300 years after the flood, the world was almost as bad as before. Looking down on the scene, God must have felt very sad. Perhaps he wondered if it would have been better had Noah not built the ark and everybody had died in the flood. But, of course, he wouldn't have done that. God had promised Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden that someday he would win back everything they had lost when they disobeyed him. He had said that Eve's offspring would crush the snake's head. Therefore, he couldn't let all of Eve's children die. One of them someday had to win the victory over Satan. God could do only one thing. Before the world became totally wicked again, he had to find someone who would help him, someone who would keep alive the knowledge of what he was like and what plans he had for the world, someone who would love him and always be loyal to him, someone who would stand for truth and goodness in an evil world. Someone who would bring up children properly and teach them to keep his law. Where could God find someone like this? In Nineveh? Perhaps? Or Babylon? Both of these cities were quite large by now. Where could God find someone he could depend on? Who would do what he wanted done? At last, his all-seeing eye turned toward that far-off city of Ur, known later as Ur of Chaldeans. A man called Terah lived there with his 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Abram was a good boy and loved the Lord. Someone, perhaps his mother, had told him the story of creation of God's wonderful love for Adam and Eve. Abram had learned about all the joy they had known in Eden as they walked and talked with God. He had learned how sin had spoiled everything and how God, through Noah, his own great grandfather, that's a lot of greats, had tried to give the world a new start. And Noah might still be alive right now, so did it say was or is? It says his own, so like his great grandfather is still alive. As Abram listened again and again to the old story, he grew to love God. He decided to honor and obey him for the rest of his life. So he made that commitment in his heart. He made it in his heart and his mind, and that's all it has to be. It has to be with you, your heart, your mind, and God sees that instantly. Like I said yesterday, God is there. All we have to do is plug right into his supernatural ability, supernatural powers, and that's it. Like when your heart decides, that's that. That was not an easy decision for him. Most of the people in Ur, including his own father, worshipped idols and probably the moon god. So Abram had to take his stand for God all by himself. And God rewarded him. God will reward us today. He is the same as he was back then with Abram. When you decide to love God and stand up for God, things will change. Because he needs people to stand up with a backbone right now. Can you imagine how much worse that sin has gotten since the ark? I mean, this is, 300 years later? Look at how far along we are now. So God still needs us. He's still giving us a chance to come to him and love him. So think about that. The story's not over yet. God was watching Abram just as he watches every boy and girl today. When Abram made his great decision, I can imagine that God said, "Here is the young person I've been looking for, a boy who will not fail me, a boy I can tell my secrets to whom I can trust the future of my plan to save the world." That's the end of the story. Apologize for all the pausing, but we need to, as Christians, stand up. As people who love Jesus Christ, I want to rephrase that, because everybody has different labels and titles. I don't know what my title is. I love Jesus Christ. I love Jesus Christ. He's my Lord and Savior. I have accepted him into my heart, and I know that I want to be like Abram, stand up against the things, even if I'm by myself sometimes. But it's important, because God will reward you for that. And he shows you through your everyday life that he will reward you. He will be there. And one of my favorite stories is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they stood up for their belief in God, and the king was like, "Okay, we'll let your God save you," and sent them into the fire. Well, God was there in the fire. And I'm getting ahead of myself because we haven't read about that yet. But God was there. And it's important to think about it this way. We're all going to go through trials and fires in our life. And God is right there. Hopefully not literal fires, but God is right there with us in the midst of it. And like, their clothes didn't burn. They didn't even come out smelling like smoke. He was there with them in the fire, protecting them. And that should give you a visual in your head, like when you're going through whatever trial it is in your life, like, it will be over with. It's not, you put your trust and your faith in God, and you will come out the other side of it. And you might be rewarded even greater for thinking this way. God is with me. I'm going to get through this. This is not the end. So I know there are hard things that we go through, but just keeping God the center of it, and knowing that he's there to surround you and be with you, it's important. So hope you enjoyed the story tonight. I know I paused and kept reading, but until the next story, this is Storytime with Mrs. Mullins. I thank you for listening.